I know you're here for. And we are just going to go ahead and get started because I like to be timely, and it's late, and I'm sure everyone is living the dual life of trying to get things done for ourselves and for our children all day long. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, I just want to introduce myself. I am Miele. I'm the founder of Evolved Education. We are a tutoring, consulting, and school placement advisement company. We serve students from pre-nursery through college in a very customized one-to-one educational way. And we use this paradigm to understand our students. And I met Hallie, and we were talking about her experience in her teaching of kindergarten. And what I really connected with her around was her viewpoint of her students in this way. So I think parents really, probably we all really look at our children in many different dimensions because we're really tasked to do that. And it is becoming more and more so that our educators are also looking at our children in multiple ways as well in terms of their holistic development. And what I love to do is really provide our families with information from educators who will be able to tell us what is it that our children should be learning coming into kindergarten, and what is this year going to really be about. And we'll talk a little bit about remote learning and if it's going to happen and what that might look like as well. But really, we're here to mostly talk just about what kindergarten is about and provide you with some resources. Following this webinar, we have a blog post on our website which has links to some resources that Hallie is going to be mentioning. So I'm really excited to present to you Hallie, who's going to talk. She's going to introduce herself, and then she's going to get to her prepared webinar. So Hallie, I'll let you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your experience and background, and you just tell me when to flip the slides and I'll do that. Okay. All right, great.
No problem. So yes, I'm Hallie. I have been teaching kindergarten for the past 3 years. I'm going into my 4th year of teaching kindergarten. I was teaching previously for the Uncommon schools, and I am going to teach with Ascend Charter Schools this upcoming fall. I'm very excited to make that transition. So when I'm teaching, I think I look at the child both academically and really holistically. And I think that especially in kindergarten, when your child is learning, how to do just like everyday things like walk in a straight line and like learn how to blow their nose themselves and like learn how to tie their own shoes. It's so important to kind of bring that into the everyday learning and academic learning as well, and make sure that they're growing not only as like academic learners, but also as like learners and like citizens of the world. So that's kind of the approach that I take when I'm teaching. And then to get started, I have my master's in teaching from Miele Graduate School. So I got that last year, and I also have my New York City teacher certification. So and I went to Kenyon College, and I graduated in 2017, but I majored in American Studies with an education concentration and psychology. So that has kind of informed a lot about how I approach school, how I approach teaching, and with that really a holistic kind of point of view. So to start off, something that I like to do in my own classroom at the beginning of the year is ask parents what their goals are for their child this year in kindergarten. So it can be an academic goal, it can be a social goal, like it could be any kind of goal that you have. It's like there's nothing too big or too small to hope for your child to learn, and you can go ahead. If you want, you can write it in the chat if you would feel comfortable, and I can share out a few goals that some of you all share out but yeah, I would just take a minute to think about what at the end of the year do you envision or would you want your child to learn at the end of kindergarten. So there can be like lots of different goals, like some of the goals that I have had parents write in the past have been they want their child to be able to write and complete sentences. A really big goal that I personally love hearing from parents is writing that they want their child to feel really confident in themselves and in their learning by the end of the year. And like that they feel confident speaking up and sharing their opinion is a really great goal. Yeah, feeling more comfortable reading and writing is a great goal to have, especially entering kindergarten, and that's something that we really focus on within kindergarten, is making sure students feel comfortable and confident reading and writing as well. So thank you all for sharing. And if you come up with any other goals, like feel free to just hold on to those and think about them like throughout the presentation, I guess, as we go through the things covered in kindergarten. So for this webinar, I'm going to be talking through goals and what's going to be covered in terms of literacy, math, your child's social emotional development, their fine and gross motor skills, and their expressive and receptive language. So how they're developing emotionally, how like a big thing in kindergarten is pencil grip. So that's like a big fine and gross motor skill, and how they're able to express themselves and follow directions is also huge. And so as I'm going through each of these topics, you can think through the following 3 questions. So the first would be what your child should know at the beginning of the year. So I'm going to be talking through like, these are a few skills that you could work on with your child up until the beginning of the school year and honestly throughout the entire school year. Also thinking about like what tools you could use to support your child in being confident and prepared for kindergarten. And then lastly, of how you can use the tools that I mentioned and how you can use them effectively. So to start off, we're going to talk about literacy. And when you're going into kindergarten, the first thing that the teacher is going to really think about and focus on is, does your child know their uppercase and lowercase letters? And are they able to recognize them? It's not just like saying your ABCs, but like seeing the letter on a page and then saying like, that's the letter and then the letter, and doing that with both their uppercase and lowercase letters. We're also looking for the child to recognize the sounds that all the letters make. So when we look at that, we'll be looking at just lowercase letters. We're also looking at the child's ability to write their name, their first and their last name, but it's really great if they can come in knowing how to write their first name as just a jumping off point. And then basic concepts about print. So concepts about print are identifying like when you're holding a book, knowing that like this is a book, and when you open a book, we read from left to right, and the words that are read on a page are the words, like if you're reading to your child, that they recognize that the words that you're reading out loud are those same words on the page. So I think it's also really important to note that this is a continuum, and like every child is going to come in on a different level, and that's okay. We really spend the first 3 months or so of school practicing all of these like basic skills with literacy. So it's okay if your child may need extra practice with those, or if they are able to recognize all of their letters, and then if they know all their letters, like I would recommend like really working on the sound ID. So that kids are going, they don't have to, they should know the different sounds that the letters make. So for example, like A makes two sounds, and I would say that the letter G can make two sounds as well. But in terms of that, that's something that they would learn like further on in the year, once they have that firm foundation of letter sounds, of like all of the basic letter sounds and just the simple sounds that they make. Then they will go into, for example, like learning vowels. So vowels is something that they'll learn that all vowels can make two sounds. And that happens a little bit later in kindergarten, after they have that first understanding of the sounds that they make. So in order to practice, things that you can use are both, like you can use flashcards. We use that a lot in the classroom, of letter ID. So you would just like have the letter and you can test them and mix up the order of the letters, of both uppercase and lowercase letters, and have them identify the letter. You can also have them and use lowercase letters to practice sound. So what you'll see, the chart at the bottom, that's the Wilson Foundation Letter and Sound ID chart. So that is what we would use in the classroom to help students, give them both that visual representation of the letter, as well as like a picture that helps them remember the sound. And so that's something that you can practice with your child. Then also you can, yes. So yes, that is a great question. I would say that you should, if you're working on basic sight words, so like is, am, those, you want to work out, you don't need to practice the vowels first. What I try to do with sight words, and what I've learned, like as I've been reading through a lot of workbooks, is there's a difference between, for example, of what I would classify as a sight word versus what we would say in school is like a CVC word. So a CVC word is like a consonant, vowel, consonant. So it's a word like cat. So that's a word that we would want a student to sound out. Whereas if we're talking about sight words, typically I would say like a sight word would be is, where if they just look at the word is, and they would just know automatically that that's the word is. So it's more of like a difference between memorization and sounding out. So I would say that learning that too, if they're able to, like, it's kind of tricky because yes, you do want them to learn that there's two different sounds, but it depends on if you're applying it to doing just like memorization sight words versus sight words that you're going to start sounding out. So I would say, yes, you want them to recognize that difference between like the two letter sounds. Hopefully that answers the question.
Haley, can I jump in here? So I just want to make sure that everyone noticed the question. So the question, I think, is a really good one, because I can remember working on this with my own children, and it is tricky. And I guess I don't think, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that what you're trying to say, and the question is, do vowels and learning that some letters make two different sounds come after starting sight words, or should that foundation be created prior to sight words? So I guess, what you're kind of talking about is just that delicate dance between memorizing sight words and building the sound letter correspondence and the ability to sound out a sight word if they so needed to, right? So can you just speak a little bit more about, are parents messing anything up if they're focusing on memorizing words, or should they really be focusing more on those sound letter correspondences? Where should we be putting our efforts, in other words?
So I would say that it is like a kind of a delicate balance between the two. I would say that in the beginning of kindergarten, I would say it's definitely I would place a greater emphasis on that letter sound correspondence, because students aren't going to be able to really recognize a sight word if they don't know the letters and like the sounds they're making to begin with. So I would say what we do is we give students like a mini list of words, and those are, it's like the, am, is, and those are words that they're going to be seeing a lot in a text once they start to read. So I would place a greater emphasis on letter sound correspondence, because that's going to be a bigger help to them once they then start to decode and like break apart more complex words.
Thank you. I thought that was really helpful. Anybody have any other questions about anything else that was mentioned? Feel free to jump in if you do want anything to be clarified. Thanks. Carry on.
Okay, no problem. So I would say another big thing that we work on a lot in the beginning of kindergarten is handwriting and correct letter formation and name practice. So some students will come into kindergarten knowing how to write their first and last names. Some students are able to write, most of the letters of their name. Some of them can write their name, first and last name, like flawlessly. It kind of really is all on a spectrum. So something that I included in the tools list is a workbook that practices both handwriting, and then there's also a lot of space for name writing. So students will typically be able to focus on mastering like those letters within their name. Also using the name as a great resource also for having them use like letter identification and having them identify sounds, like the letter sounds within their name. So that's also a great place to have them practice. So I would say if your child is struggling with writing their first or last name, that's totally fine. And we see that quite a bit. And what we usually try to do is have them instead of having them focus on the entire name, which can feel overwhelming, is have them master like a few letters at a time. So for example, if it were my name and I wasn't sure quite how to write my name, I would start off with just writing like HA. And once I was able to write HA myself and didn't need any support forming that letter, then we would go the next day to write like HAL. And so I would trace the letter L and have the child then write over it. So then it's building it's building the foundation for them to eventually start to write all the letters by themselves. And so
just so I can intervene there, Haley. So some people joined a little late. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that Hallie's put a toolkit for us on our website where you can go and access an Amazon list of some workbooks and tools that she's talking about in this webinar, so that you can get them easily and then continue to work. So when she talks about the fact that she put in the tool list this handwriting book, that's where you can actually access it.
Yes.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. And then the last thing, which is really important and just something that is really great to just get your child to start working on now, is learning about their concepts about print. And so that, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is a great time to have your child just start to explore books and just explore like how to turn pages in a book. Some of your kids may already be doing that. And like to have them, something that we really work on in the beginning of the year is tapping each word out. So what I would recommend to do with your child whenever you're reading is to use your pointer finger and to touch each word on the page. And you can start having your child also touch each word so that they're hearing that word and like that word correspondence between the words you're saying out loud and what you're saying, what is being read on the book. Something else we work a lot on is something that we call letters versus words. And so that understanding that letters make words and words then make a whole sentence. And so you can have your child practice touching like a whole word, and then you can isolate a word and have them count out the letters and so that they're understanding like a letter is different from a word. Also a great way to kind of push them with their letter identification is to isolate a word, and you can say something like, if the word, like find the letter X in this word, what's the first letter in this word, what's the last letter of this word. And those are really big things that we look for in the very beginning of kindergarten and make sure that students are able to master, because those are the very foundations of learning to read.
I'm muted, so sorry about that. So I just wanted to make sure if there are any questions about literacy, you can put them right into the chat and we'll make sure to answer them, but we're going to move on to the next slide. Great.
So these are just a few ways to practice. So I spoke a little bit about them, but you can use flashcards to practice letter ID and letter identification and sound identification. And when you're practicing, it's important to practice using lowercase letter sound identification. You can use both, but typically in the classroom, we use just the lowercase sound letters for sound. When you're writing, it's important to have them practice on larger lines and larger dotted lines. So there's a lot of tracing letters and then having them practice on a larger space to get comfortable writing within a larger setting. I would also encourage, whenever they're writing in a workbook or whenever they're identifying the letter, you want them to be saying the letter out loud as they're writing. So they're saying that they're having that oral and visual connection. And I just spoke about the concepts about print, about exploring kind of those exploring different ways to like read a book, what to do when you get to the end of a line, where to go, what's a picture, what's a word. Those are all like concepts for, as adults, we take for granted that because we just know, but they are all for beginning readers really important. And then the last is just identifying and introducing kind of one syllable sight words like am, is, the, words like that. And if you have any further questions about sight words, feel free to ask.
Yeah, great. I know it's a really interesting year because I also found with my experience, and I'm sure you agree, is that the children are really all over the map too with regards to what they know and what they're coming in with, right? And there is a lot of that understanding from teachers. Would you agree?
Yes, like students really come in all over. And the beautiful thing about kindergarten is they come in kind of all over the place, and all of the students by the end of the year are like ready and above for first grade. So it's not like a point to be, if like what I'm talking about, if your child already masters, like there's lots of things you can keep working with them on. And if your child is coming in and they may not know all these things, that's okay, and they will get there.
So there's a question, how many sight words should a kindergartner know? Do you have sort of a number, like by the end of the year, what's that number about?
It's about 250 or so sight words. And so the reason we have those are, by the end of kindergarten, what we want students to be able to do is, and the reason sight words are so important in kindergarten is because students are also learning how to decode words. And so a big thing that we focus on is once students are really solid with sounding words out and like understanding letter sounds and understanding those different vowel sounds, we want students to then focus just on the words that they need to decode and not worry about sight words. So we want them to read the sight words. We say read your sight words fast and decode everything else.
Got it. Very helpful. All right, let's go on to the next one, yeah?
Okay, so now we get to talk about math. So with math, there are yeah, just like reading, there it comes on a continuum. So what we're looking for students to be able to know, and what we focus on in the very beginning of the year, is counting out loud in correct number order. So in the not skipping between numbers. We're also looking to make sure that they are able to write their numbers 1 through 10. And if your child is writing numbers backwards, we see the number 3 backwards, 9, 7 backwards, that's okay. That's developmentally appropriate. And that's something that we'll work on a lot in kindergarten. So we're also looking at number recognition. So if your child sees a random number 1 through 10, that they're able to recognize that right away. And then also that they're able to count physical objects or printed objects through 1 through 10. So if they're presented with a picture of like 7 seahorses, they're able to recognize, like, they're able to count and accurately say, like, this is 7 seahorses. Or if they're given what I recommend, we use a lot in school, are counting bears. And so if you give them a group of bears, they're able to count a certain amount. So counting bears are a great tool to use to practice that counting and counting in order. We also, I recommend using Unifix cubes. So that's what you see at the top right picture. Those are going to be also super important when you start further into kindergarten and you start working on story problems or like number problems. And lastly is the hundreds chart. And I recommend, like, you can just print a picture of a hundreds chart and have it for your child to look at and have them practice showing, like, identifying numbers on there.
Yeah, great. And we have in the tools, we also have where you can get the Unifix cubes and the sorting bears and things like that we use. I still actually use this with my kids who are much older now, but I find that it's always helpful to have tools to understand math. And I think that if we can carry on a lot of the parenting work that we do with our children from kindergarten throughout elementary school, even when it becomes maybe less desirable to use the tools, I find that to actually be really, really helpful. So one question is coming in, just, should there be a focus on addition, subtraction, and word problems? And maybe, should I go to the next slide? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Good. Yes.
Yes. So that is a great question. And that is something that we actually start working on in the very beginning of kindergarten. And so these kind of ways that I've put up here of like how to practice. So you can give your child a set number of bears or cubes and have them identify how many. You can also give them a larger group and have to count out a certain amount of the bears, which really helps them identify, like, are they able to stop at a given number, or are they going to keep counting? And that's a really big skill that we want to work on, especially once we get into addition and subtraction. So you also want them to practice just writing their numbers out, and story. The last part goes into comparing amounts and story problems. So if you give them 2 groups of 2 different numbers, you can say which group has more, which group has less. And then you can build in the addition and subtraction part of that, of saying, like, how much is it if I put both of my groups together? So I would say that building in that addition and subtraction is really important. And as the year goes on, we're going to build up to numbers that go up to 20, of like doing story problems within 20. So that's something that you can definitely begin to push or like work on now. I would say though that it's super important to use the tools when you are working, like when the student's working, so that they're getting that visual connection to what they're doing. So not necessarily working on like a page of addition or addition facts or a page of subtraction facts, but having them work through with a physical object first and then representing that on paper.
Right. I love that. foundational work so much because my work is more with middle school students in mathematics. And I find that when students have the opportunity to really build that 3D understanding of math that's not really worksheet generated, first, it really makes such a difference in how much they understand math. And it's just essential. And if you're really not sure, if let's say you do get a worksheet from home and you're not sure, or from school to do at home, and you're not sure if your child really understands it, you could always ask them to show you a picture of it, or to use the bears to show you what it means, just to check their understanding. And if you're concerned about them not building that understanding, I would raise your hand right away, because it's just so crucial that the students get that hands-on experience with math and their understanding of numbers.
Yeah. And in
So
kindergarten, I was
I
just going to say, in kindergarten, we usually have them do a physical representation first and then the representation on paper. So it's more important that they're able to show us what they know than it is in the beginning to like write out what they know.
Yes, agree totally. And it's really different, I think, for parents, because we're perhaps of the age that learning was quite different for us, especially in the area of math, when we were being taught how to do things, and now we're going to be parenting our children in school, and math is really done in a much more conceptual way right now. So you really do want to make sure that you're understanding what your teachers are doing. And if you're not sure, kind of, go back to what we're talking about here, which is always make the meaning. Keep going back to what I'm saying, like make the meaning. Oh yeah, Mary said make the meaning. One other question is, when is it appropriate to start teaching about telling time? Do you guys do that a lot in kindergarten? What's that like?
We do in a kindergarten, at least like where I was teaching, telling time was a kind of end of the year topic. So we're focusing the first half of the year more so on, like, I would say number manipulation. It would be like a bigger way to say it, of just like relationships between numbers, like numbers are represented in physical and like written ways. So I would say that you can definitely start teaching time like whenever you like feel so, like you can start to teach time. It's not something that's going to really offset anything that we're learning as like a major conceptual, like a major concept. I just would say that when teaching time, something that we really focus on is time both on a digital and an analog clock. So having them practice on both of those. And we do like pictures of a clock and then what time is it on the clock, or having them identify like the difference between a minute hand and a hour hand. So you definitely can begin to do that in the beginning, but we don't address it fully till the end. I would say, honestly, understanding calendar and like times, like days of the week, is something that we focus on more so in the beginning of the year than clocks and time.
Makes sense. Okay, let's go on to the next.
So now we're going to talk about the other fun parts of being in kindergarten. So when children enter kindergarten, they are often people pleasers. So you'll notice that they want the teacher to be happy with them. They want to do the right thing. They come in and if you ask them to do something, they often will do it right away because they want to follow directions. We also, though, notice that sometimes, especially adjusting in the beginning of kindergarten, children sometimes struggle to control their emotions. So it's sometimes some of the first times when they have to sit for long periods and may not get what they want right away, or they may feel frustrated because they're not understanding something. And so this is a big time when we are teaching. we talk a lot about showing stamina and like being able to show grit and keep working even if it's hard are big things that we talk a lot about in my classroom of like, it's okay if you don't get it. And like, this is the appropriate way to respond. If you're not understanding, like, this is what you do to tell the teacher. If you need help, like, we don't cry and like throw ourselves on the floor. If we need help, that's just not like, we're big kids, we're in big school, and we have to, respond accordingly. So those are things to really reinforce when you're at home, of like appropriate responses to when things are hard, or when you're not sure what to do. Like, this is the appropriate way to respond. And so also we begin to focus, children are starting to think about how they're making friends in a more meaningful way. So they're not just thinking about you look like, and they're thinking about things in a more holistic way. So ways that you can support your child in their social emotional development is really focusing on like those ways to kind of approach how to handle feelings of frustration or anger. So we work a lot on like taking deep breaths, or like, if you need time to go take time to yourself and like go sit somewhere else, like, you need to raise your hand and kind of advocate for yourself, and say like, I need a break, or like, I need time to calm down, or saying like, I need to take a walk, and kind of encouraging those ways to handle kind of more like extreme emotions. And something that we also want to really focus on is kind of using words of empathy and using that to describe your feelings, and encouraging the child to do the same. So having and modeling like ways that you may feel, and like ways, this is when children start to understand other children's feelings. So kind of modeling for children, like, I understand why you may feel this way. Like, can you tell me why you feel this way? Or like, I understand, I would feel the same way too. And kind of giving them those words and modeling, just having them practice expressing their feelings through words and less with their actions.
So can we take a minute here, because I feel like everyone, of course, reading this, you think, well, that's great if we're dropping our kids off this year.
Yeah.
But I know you did such a great job this year with your group with remote learning, and maybe you can tell us just a little bit about some of the creative ideas you have around helping parents if we're not able to be together. What are some things that may happen remotely, or within just the family unit, or within a small pod if they're creating one? Like, what are some things that you would want to have them be doing?
So I think like in terms in the, like, first I would want them to, practicing a lot of like sharing, allowing other friends to talk, is something that we practice a lot of. So like, if they're not able to physically be with each other, practicing sharing like tools, classroom tools, or like sharing toys, then we practice a lot of like letting your friends talk, or letting like your friends, like, learning how to wait on what you're thinking and let someone else kind of be able to talk, and let them share their own thoughts. In terms of like what to do if a child is like finding the work really frustrating, we really encourage families to like just like be really empathetic and say like, I understand, I know that feels really hard, and like, that was really hard for me too when I did that, but I know that we're going to work through this together, and I know that you can do it. Makes the child really feel confident that they're able to do it. And if they're still having a hard time, saying like, why don't we go take a walk, or like, why don't we go we do a lot of like brain breaks. So like let's do 10 jumping jacks, and then we'll go back to our work, and kind of giving them like a outlet to have their emotion, and then showing them that like you can have your emotion, but then you have to return to the work. Not sure, does that answer?
I think it does. Yeah, for me, I know it's really specific towards every child, and so
Yeah.
I do know that, and I know it's definitely something that hopefully in partnership with teachers we can work on this aspect. But I guess what I'm also hearing from you is how hopeful it is that we actually can move children through learning, even if we need to do it remotely. There is a way, and there are things that you were doing this spring that were very impactful on students. So it's certainly possible to move a child through some social emotional development in the remote learning.
Yeah, I would say like something that we would do, like a few, I guess, examples is for like one of my students, he had a hard time like expressing his emotion. And so he had we called it a menu of like different emotions he may be feeling, of like pictures. And like he could point out like, I'm feeling X, or like, I'm feeling Y, and then we could have a discussion about like why they were feeling that way, or like what kind of made them feel that certain way. And that was really helpful for him. And I think like with other students, it was honestly a lot of asking them like, how does this make you feel? And kind of having them try to explain like how it's, which is also hard for a 5-year-old because they don't always have like the vocabulary, or they don't always have like the life schema to know how they're feeling. Like they may be feeling something, but it may be something else. So like that's also a big thing that we work on.
So what about there's a question about what about physical releases? So what kinds of things do you do for those things that are needed for some children?
So like I'm just like, as a like if they need like more like if they need to like release their energy physical, is that kind of, I
I'm
just
not
want to make
sure.
sure I'm saying,
Maybe we'll give
or
them.
if like they're displaying their emotions in a physical way.
I think it's more about. I'm not sure, but if you want to clarify the question a little bit, like frustration, kind of.
Got it.
Yeah. So how do you deal with frustration? I guess is the question.
So frustration, like also like different children display frustration in different ways. So I think like if a child is like showing a lot of like, they're like slamming the pencil down, or like throwing their paper, which like are definitely things I've seen in kindergarten. It's it's two-part. Like first, we want to make sure that they get to a place where they feel calm. So also like different children respond different ways. Like one of the kids that I'd mentioned earlier, who uses like, we have help him with his like emotional menu. He really likes to go take a walk, and we go take a walk like down the hallway. So I know that if you're at home, something you could do is like, maybe you can like take a lap around your apartment, or like take a lap somewhere within around the block, something like that. Or what we also do a lot of is we like have them color their feelings. So like sometimes they like, children need to express how they're feeling like through coloring. So it's also giving the child, when they're showing those kind of like physical frustration, it's giving them options so that they feel in control. So it's that illusion of control that they have. So like when you give the children two options, they can pick, they're like, oh, well, I get to do this. So that makes them calm down. And then after that, we really try to address like, I could tell that you were really upset by this. Like next time, this is how we're going, this is what you need to do in order to like fix your behavior. So like we, like as a big kid, we don't throw our paper if we're upset or if we're frustrated. We need to say like, mom, or dad, like I need a break, this is really hard for me. And that's something that takes a lot of practice. It's not something that always happens like for
Yeah.
the first or second or even like 10th time. Like it's developmentally appropriate to see your child like display, physical frustration. But I found that giving them that option of like different things to choose from usually makes them then feel more in control of the situation.
So helpful. I actually went to a seminar on a model of working with students that's called collaborative problem solving. It's from Lives in the Balance. I'll put it in the chat. It's really interesting, but it talks a lot about how children display behaviors and sometimes they're undesired behaviors because they don't have the skills to really move through that, whatever it was, in a way that is acceptable or reasonable or mutually beneficial, or those kinds of things. So it's all about really just empowering your child with more skills, which it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing when you're talking about that. So and it's so helpful to hear that it's developmentally appropriate, because I even see that with older children. or myself on occasion. I don't know. All right. Fine and gross motor development.
So in kindergarten, we are working really hard on having children develop correct pencil grip. So some children you may have already taught your child how to like correctly hold a pencil. If not, that's totally fine. That's something we work on. And even like if you have, that's something we definitely adjust and like continue to work on throughout kindergarten. So that's a big thing to practice, both in a workbook, just having them and also like this is when children begin to develop if they're left-handed versus right-handed. So it's really important to not kind of like tell your child how to like pick up a pencil because they may be right-handed, or so letting them really explore which hand they eventually feel most comfortable with. And once you notice that they're picking the pencil up with the same hand, then begin to kind of adjust their pencil grip. And so this picture that I've included, this is kind of like the ideal of what we want to see, is like, we call it the helping hand flat. So that's their other hand. And then the pencil holding hand is in the correct pencil grip. So that's like one part that we really focus on. We also work a lot on walking upstairs, holding objects. So being able to do that, walking and staying in line. So being able to follow the person in front of them and not just wandering in and out of a line. And then also we are working on like ability to hold multiple objects. So their pencil grip should become more refined. Instead of holding the pencil like this, they'll start to hold it like a real pencil. So like the other things I just want to stress, and especially as we go into the school year of whatever that may bring, students do not need to go into kindergarten knowing how to tie their shoes. However, this is a big thing that we work on in kindergarten. So tying shoes, and even into first grade. So working on learning how to tie their shoes is a great thing to practice at home. And also we work a lot, especially as the year goes on, of dressing and undressing independently. So taking coats off, like putting on scarves, like being able to do that themselves, not only builds like their dexterity, but also builds their confidence and like their independence and being able to do things by themselves. And they want to start doing things themselves also.
Definitely.
So with expressive and receptive language, there are a few things that we want to see children do as they're entering kindergarten and going through kindergarten. So first off, we want them to be able to answer yes and no questions. And something that like I'll just talk about now, going with that of like what to practice with your child, is prompting them to speak in a complete thought. So instead of, if you're asking them like, do you like ice cream? And if they're saying yes and then stopping, you want to kind of like push them to say, yes, I like ice cream. so that they're understanding the entire thought. And if they're not automatically saying like, yes, I like ice cream, you can say, listen to how I'm going to answer the question, or say like, yes, I like, you can repeat it for them and then say, can you repeat that for me? So we do that a lot with like question asking, like, who is the main character in the story? The main character in the story is, and then giving the answer, so that they're really pushing that full thought. And then that'll help them when they then go to write as well, will be really useful. So we also are working on retelling a story or something done. So if you're talking about, this is what I did today, they should be able to retell whatever it is that they did in like pretty coherently. We also work a lot, especially in the beginning, of speaking clearly and being able to be understood easily. So working a lot on speaking up and not mumbling what they're saying, so that other people can hear you. Also working on 2 to 3 step directions. So like, go upstairs, brush your teeth, and then checking in to make sure they go upstairs and actually brush their teeth. They're like, go upstairs, put your clothes away, come back downstairs. So having them, you can have them repeat the directions and then complete the task is really important. And then also initiating conversations is really something that we look for children to start to do. So kind of with comprehension which is really important with their literacy as well, is whenever you're reading to your child, asking them to tell you what's happening either on that page, or like say like, can you tell me what's happening in the story, is going to really push their their expressive language, and also comprehension of the text. And then also just encouraging them to speak in a complete sentence and loudly and clearly so that others can hear them.
Okay. I know I love the language development that happens in kindergarten. I feel like it's so powerful. You see them just blossom in so many ways. Okay, so we're going to pause here just in case there are any questions, and I'll just kind of talk a little bit in case there are not. And if you do have any questions, you can throw them into the Q&A, or you can throw them into the chat, and we'll make sure to address them. But I just want to say that for anyone who is entering kindergarten, we're here for you during this year. And if you do have questions, Hallie is offering an opportunity to work with her in the month of August, as school is not yet started. So if you would like to do any sessions just to really target any of this readiness work with either within parent coaching or also right directly with your child, that is something that we can set up in our company. And like we said in the beginning, we have a blog post on our website right now that has an Amazon list of different tools that were mentioned in this webinar. If you would like to go back to the webinar, we've taped it and we're going to put it on our YouTube channel as well. So you can always go back and take a better look at the slides and just revisit different areas that you would like to do a deeper dive within. So I don't necessarily see any more questions at this time. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our participants and to Hallie for producing this. Really, it was such a pleasure to be able to talk kindergarten with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to talk about kindergarten. I love talking about it. So
I know you do. I just love hearing all of your ideas and the things that you're doing with your students. I know you do such a good job. So, all right, we're going to close up, and thanks so much for joining us. Have a good evening. Hallie, if you want to stay on, I'll stop recording.